tonight. The new president and CEO of McDonough District Hospital is nearly 2 months into the job now. This came in the wake of an internal investigation surrounding allegations against hospital management under the previous CEO. WGEM's Dylan Smith talked with Bill Murdock today about what he's bringing with new leadership. Dylan?
Daniel, first and foremost for MDH President and CEO Bill Murdock is employee and community trust. There's several other things in the works, but overall, he wants to make sure that his team has a sense of engagement with the organization like they've never felt before.
It's been a wild ride, I guess.
That's how Bill Murdock describes his first month and a half without interim in front of his title as President and CEO of McDonough District Hospital.
Our primary goal right now is just to build relationship and trust in the organization.
But he's jumped headfirst into that position. Murdock replaces former CEO Brian Dietz, who stepped down in February after a 2-month-long investigation of allegations against hospital management. Macomb Mayor Michael Inman confirmed he and other city leaders received anonymous letters from MDH employees who were dissatisfied with the organization's culture and work environment. But Murdock says he's flipping the script.
We're sharing a lot of our what we call Operation Council notes, which is a senior leadership team.
Murdock has a working list of what he calls lean ideas, some of which include bringing robotics to MDH and analyzing paid practices. At first, he wasn't on board with the pharmacy that's being built in the center of campus, but he's grown to embrace the addition.
There's a lot of healthcare challenges going on in the industry, and we need to look outside that core book of business to see what we can do to become more viable.
And Murdock is also in the process of forming a community advocacy committee where leaders from nearly all McDonough County towns will provide input to him. He says there's no timeline on when things like robotics could come to MDH, but the pharmacy should be open for business before the end of 2024. Daniel?
All right, thank you, Dylan. And before being named the interim CEO last December, Murdock was the hospital's chief financial officer for 5 years.